Since today is Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium, let's have a look back 34 years to the 1990 New York Yankees Old Timers Day at the Old Ballpark, where the apparent young budding superstar Kevin Moss hit 2 homers and drove in 5 runs. That's Sammy Sosa not making the catch there. In a game the Yankees unfortunately lost 8-7. The chants of George must go rang out throughout the ballpark for all 9 innings. That would be the former Yankees principal owner and later a beloved figure, George M. Steinbrenner III. And we're back like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is New York Yankees Old Timers Day. It is a long-standing tradition of more than 75 years, in fact, since the first Yankees Old Timers Day. I was at a few in my lifetime, but one in particular stands out for reasons that might not be immediately apparent. But as Aaron Judge continues to get better, like how could he be getting better? He appears to be a better baseball player than he was in his huge year 2017, where he should have won the Most Valuable Player award, but didn't because fucking cheating Astros. But I digress. 2022, the guy has 62 home runs. He's on pace to equal or match that. I mean, who the fuck knows what's going to happen? It's baseball, Susan. But we are, in real time, we are seeing something that I, as a younger Yankee fan, did not think that we were ever going to see. And that is a generational talent. A, dare I say, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle level New York Yankee. We are watching him in real time. So for Yankee fans, and I hate to always seem like the old head, but the reality is you don't know how good you have it, how good you've had it if you're under 40. You have no conception of what it's like. Yeah, you get angry. And I remember a couple of years ago when the Yanks were on pace for 120 fucking wins. But if we don't trade Joey Gallo, the season's over. Like, just stupid shit. Be thankful you have an organization that is committed to winning, even though Hank sucked, Hal sucks, George sucked, everyone sucks. I wish we had an owner like Steve Cohen. No, thank you. You need a little perspective here. As a much younger person, as a kid, the Yankees had big teams. They would have gone to the playoffs a number of times during the Don Mattingly era. And they didn't until Mattingly's last year because there were no layers of playoffs except for a championship series. Either you won your division or you went home. So you had teams, Yankee teams with 97 wins, 92 wins, 91 wins, and they're on a golf course the day after the season ended. And then the franchise went to shit. So 1990, my dear old dad, SCF and Co., because the team was so bad, they were able to buy a piece of a season ticket package that by today's standards, each ticket would probably be $1,200. But the team sucked, and the other corporation, I think it was some kind of a law consultancy firm, whatever it was. I'm not sure the name of it, but they were the primary owners of this particular season ticket plan. And the seats were 30 feet up the first baseline, 6 rows back. Champions level, if it's nowadays, where the food is free. The food is free. The tickets are $1,200 a piece. So, in the immortal words of Terry Silver in Karate Kid Part 3, nothing's for free. Family of 4, although nobody really does this, would be the equivalent of about $5,000 to see one game. But my dad's accounting firm, Shulman Cohn First, Kramer and Rosen, Shulman Cohn First, SCF and Co., they were able to buy a piece of a plan. And I got to go to like 5 or 6 games in 1990. That is the bottom of the Yankees franchise. Now, yeah, they bottomed out in the 60s, but it was different. The war was going on. Mantle got old, Maris got old and was traded. Things went wrong, but the organization was adrift. They had this absurd run from 1921 through 1964, a 44-season stretch where they won like almost half the World Series. Total ridicularity. They were due to not produce the next great player because they had produced Babe and Gehrig and then DiMaggio and then Mantle. The next generation, Tom Tresh, guys like that, no. They were just normal good players. The franchise went into the tank, but even with that, the 1970 Yankees won 93 games. Under a current playoff structure, they would have gone to the postseason. But alas, the Baltimore Orioles beat them out of sight, and they went home. The idea is, they had some good teams in that horrendous stretch where they didn't make a World Series for 12 years. Well, here we are. We haven't made a World Series in 15 years, but we've had a competitive team every season. And it is something that younger Yankee fans don't understand. True fandom is suffering. I hate to say it. This is one area where I respect Met fans. You know, I fucking hate the Mets. Mets winning the 1986 World Series, the single worst thing that happened to me in the first 15 years of my life. But I respect the fact that you almost got to be at the bottom. You almost got to be 20 games out at the beginning of September, and you're living and dying with every pitch when your team is on the West Coast, as I did. The 1990 New York Yankees went 67-95. Even with Steinbrenner having opened the purse strings, they made a lot of shitty decisions. George had too much control. Cowboys fans like to get on Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones is Irving Thalberg in the movie business compared to Bobby Bowfinger, if you get the reference. Jerry Jones at least knows football. Steinbrenner did not really know baseball nearly as well as he fancied himself. He didn't even know baseball as well as Ted Turner, for crying out loud. So 1990 was just an awful, lost disaster of a season. And there's a terrific documentary that you guys can check out. Now, I lived it, so I haven't yet seen this documentary. I watched almost every pitch of every game that year. I suffered with that piece of shit team. The 1990 New York Yankees. The season was over before it started. They were doomed from the start. They had traded off all of their good players, and the farm system, they weren't even yet producing shitty players. They were producing nothing. The farm system had unfortunately not been restocked because George kept signing big money free agents they didn't need. You need pitching, George. You don't need Jack Clark when Jack Morris is gettable for less money. That kind of thing. Just a lot of really bad decisions. So 1990, Old Timers Day. Yankee fans look forward to Old Timers Day when the team was great. And even now, the 15th anniversary, and there's some controversy because Brett Gardner's not coming back. Is there some static between him and the Yankees because they didn't offer him a contract? You know something, Bernie Williams, after 2006, even though Joe Torre loved Bernie, and Brian Cashman on record as saying, they're going to be talking about Bernie Williams, ain't nobody going to be talking about Brian Cashman someday. But Bernie Williams was not offered a contract. He was pissed off. But he got over it. If Brett Gardner is salty or upset, if that's really why he's not going, he'll get over it. Gardner was a terrific Yankee. I would say he's just a little bit below where they could do a Yankeeography. You know, they get a little ridiculous with the Yankeeographies, but I love Brett Gardner, but I don't think that there should be a Brett Gardner Yankeeography. I'm not going to go down on that hill. You can talk me out of it or talk me into it. I don't really give a shit. But 1990, Yankees Old Timers Day. You had Bill Dickey there being honored. And it's hard to imagine a time when the Steinbrenner name was like sacrilegious. It was a curse word. Almost every fan wanted Steinbrenner out. They wanted George gone. And the irony is he was soon to be taking a sabbatical from baseball for that shenanigans he pulled where he tried to ruin Dave Winfield. They found out about it, and then George was suspended, not for the first time, but he was suspended from baseball. But Bill Dickey, the great old Yankees catcher, answered to a trivia question. The Yanks have more than one number that's retired for two players. They retired number 9 for Roger Maris and for Greg Nettles. They retired number 8 for Bill Dickey and who? It ain't over till it's over. Yogi Berra. Just in case you're at a bar and somebody says, who are the two retired number 8s for the New York Yankees? Yogi Berra and Bill Dickey, both catchers. Not a coincidence. But Bill Dickey, at 1990 Old Timers Day, the Yanks were getting ready to play the Chicago White Sox. Woo! White Sox weren't terrible. There's Bill Dickey on the field. He's about 80 years old, and he's frail. He doesn't look great. And, we were sitting close enough we could see him. He made the mistake of thanking George Steinbrenner. We were with him when he was introduced, and he won World Series, and Babe Ruth, and Gehrig, and DiMaggio. They're going into all this great stuff with his career, and he starts to speak. First of all, I'd like to thank George Steinbrenner and however many thousand people, because they used to still get big crowds for Old Timers Day, even when the team was SHIT. The entire ballpark started booing and screaming, George must go. I can still hear it ringing, and I was joining, and my dad didn't really like to do that. But I was standing, 16 years old, screaming, George must go, at the top of my lungs. Now, looking forward, who'd have thunk that by the 1996 Major League Baseball season, with the Yankees having made the postseason the previous year in Mattingly's final season, and even though there was fans such as myself that thought George erred by not bringing back Buck Showalter and bringing in Joe Torre, why is he doing this? George was no longer unpopular because he made some moves that had a big team in 93. They fell shy. They would have made the playoffs under the current structure. 94, they were in first place. When the strike happened, George started to cede authority to people who knew what the fuck they were doing, like Gene Michael, like Bob Watson, and like a very young Brian Cashman, who was an intern who just kept step-laddering up. But by 1996, George was a beloved figure. George must go. George must go. Sports Illustrated even did a cover, George loses. The implication was that George Steinbrenner was a loser, despite the fact that they won the 2 World Series in 77 and 8 and had a huge team that got smashed in the 76 series and a big team that lost in the postseason in 1980. And then they probably should have beat the Dodgers in 81, and they kind of threw that one away. But they had produced big teams, but now it's all those years later, 1990, George must go. So the climate, it was a toxic climate at Yankee Stadium. The documentary goes into, on the 1990 Yankees, crime, chaos, and baseball. That's what it's called. It's streaming free if you get the Peacock channel. The climate on the team was bad. They had a lot of bad guys on that team and a lot of whining players. And a manager, he's a nice enough guy. Stump Merrill had no business being Yankees manager. They would have been better off keeping B.F. Dent, Bucky fucking Dent. Or they had the manager under their nose, as it turned out, Buck Showalter, and George almost fucked up and let Buck go when he was cleaning house after the 91 season. But 1990 Old Timers Day, there was a little tiny bit of hope. Don Mattingly was 28, 29 years old, and he was already, unfortunately, pretty much washed up. His back was really bad. He couldn't swing the same way. He couldn't get into the crouch and explode out of that crouch the way he did in his salad days of the mid-'80s, where he was a fucking monster player. Don Mattingly, you look at his prime stats, guy was ridiculous. Couldn't run, but he was one of the 2 or 3 greatest fielding first basemen who ever lived. And he was a 30 to 35 home run guy. He was hitting 340 and did not strike out more than 40 times a year. Guy was absolute money. He was gold in every way. But now he was past it. We had no big stars and nobody in the pipeline. Bernie Williams was still too green. They may have been talking about him, but I don't remember hearing about Bernie until the following season. And we hadn't drafted Derek Jeter yet. That was still a ways away. Mariano was in the system, but he had fucked up his arm. He was a young guy. I'm pretty sure Mariano was in the system. Nobody knows what's going on in rookie league or A-ball unless somebody just goes crazy. So there didn't appear to be much hope except they had called up a first baseman named Kevin Moss. And Kevin Moss broke a major league record, the fewest at-bats to get to 10 home runs. Okay? And he was young enough, and I guess he was kind of a big enough prospect. See, they were so desperate for anything, and I don't blame the Yankees for this. I don't blame them. They were so desperate for anything to latch onto that I feel like they overinflated just how much of a prospect Kevin Moss really was. but the guy hit 10 homers, I think his first 72 at-bats. In 2016, when Gary Sanchez, what happened to him, when he came up and he was just mashing. Now, Sanchez was a legitimate A prospect. I don't think Moss was, even though the Yankees portrayed it as such. But when Sanchez came up and started hitting home runs, Kevin Moss's name kept coming up. Wore the same number as Sanchez. But the idea was 10 home runs does not a career make. But Moss had a perfect swing. This is a mythical name in Yankees lore. If you're under 35, you Google him. He looks like what we imagine a great Yankee should look like. As no less an authority than Michael Patrick Francesa said, he has that lantern-jawed look like a Lou Gehrig. And that quote got a lot of play, and Francesa was later ridiculed because Moss's career was, unfortunately, not what we expected. But going into that Old Timers Day, there was at least a little excitement because he was up to like 11 or 12 homers. And so the Yankees, behind a pitcher I fucking hated, Tim Leary. He had been good earlier in his career. He was with the Dodgers in '88. He had a big fastball. He had a very easy, repeatable motion. He just wasn't that good by the time he got to the Yankees. And they kept talking about how great his stuff was. It's about more than stuff. You know, in the immortal words of Susan Waldman, the stuff is there, John. Yeah, well, it's not from where I'm sitting, it isn't. So on Old Timers Day, the Bill Dickey thing, the crowd is already pissed off. The season's over. We're 20-something games under 500. And then Leary gets the shit beat out of him. And with each run that the White Sox put up, the chants of George must go get louder and louder and louder. But lo and behold, at 7-0 down, Kevin Moss hits a 2-run homer to right field. By the way, you know who the Chicago White Sox starting right fielder was that day? I'll give you a hint. Sammy Sosa. Sammy Sosa was the Chicago White Sox starting right fielder. And Moss's 2-run homer was, and we've seen Judge do it, even though it's a new ballpark, the configuration is similar. Moss hit basically a high fly ball to right field. He didn't get anywhere near all of it. And Sammy, he drifted back, he ran out of real estate, ball went over his head. And the White Sox announcers basically are saying it's a fly ball to right field. In any other ballpark, Sammy is camped under it 10 feet in front of the fucking track. He didn't say fucking. But they were implying his ballpark's a joke. So then later in the game, Moss hit another home run. The second one, the White Sox announcers and Ken Harrelson, who I absolutely loved because he had been a Yankee broadcaster in the 80s when the team was still very good. But the second home run, Moss hit the dead center. It was a good shot. And another great name from the past who later played for the Mets, Lance Johnson. Home run right over his head. Then Moss knocked in 2 more runs with a single. Moss ended the day with 3 hits, 2 homers, 5 RBIs. The Yanks had been down 7-0, and they came all the way back to tie it at 7 in the 7th inning. Now, for a team that was really bad, they didn't have much offense. That's a hell of a comeback, even in a home game against a team that's not a world beater. This wasn't the Oakland A's of Canseco and McGuire of the day. This was an okay, a decent Chicago White Sox team who had a top-end closer. Now, one of the great things about Mariano Rivera is that Mariano had like almost a 15-year prime. Most closers have a couple of good years, like a Brad Lidge or somebody in that ballpark, the kind of Billy Wagners who had lengthier primes. They're the exception, not the rule. The White Sox had a guy named Bobby Thigpen. And Bobby Thigpen, this particular year, ended up breaking the saves record. He was a guy who had upper 90s fastball, very good command. And I think, this was the year that he broke the saves record. So unfortunately, on this particular day, the White Sox pushed a run across in the 8th inning, and the Yankees lost 8-7. So even with all the excitement in the ballpark, after the George must go, they rallied. They ended up losing a fucking game anyway. So we left the ballpark, and as we were filing out, the chants of George must go began again, and if anything, the crowd was even angrier because this was a game they should have won. It's the kind of game that even a decent team at home against an opponent that's not that great You've got to win that. You make a 7-run comeback out of nowhere, 2 home runs from your soon-to-be superstar rookie. You got to win the fucking game. And they lost. George must go. George must go. And that was 1990, Old Timers Day. And it's a good memory because I was there. I got to see Joe DiMaggio get introduced last, as he always did, and Rizzuto. I don't think Mickey was there that day. But Whitey Ford and the great Yankees from the 50s like Bill Skowron and some of the pitchers, Johnny Cooks, and guys like that. Hank Bauer always showed up, Tom Tresh, and Gene Michael, who hadn't been there. He was just there because Michael was working in the front office. Old Timers Day, though, more so the Yankees than any other team because of the history. It's always meant more. And there's some great stories like 1978 Old Timers Day, where Billy Martin had just quit. He quit before he got fired. He was about to get fired, and Steinbrenner for once would not have been in the wrong for pulling the trigger. That was where the Yankees had played okay, but the Red Sox were just running away with the American League East. And Billy was angry because Steinbrenner seemed to side with Reggie Jackson certain points. And that's when Billy famously said those two guys deserve each other. One's a born liar, meaning Reggie. The other's convicted, meaning George Steinbrenner, who had been convicted of just absurd, dumb shit that he pulled, illegal campaign contributions. Man, that is so bad that you're giving money and not even, it wasn't giving a crazy amount of money, but however he filed it, he didn't do it right, and he was lucky he wasn't thrown out of baseball for that. That was the first Steinbrenner suspension that I alluded to. But in 1978 Old Timers Day, we had a heartwarming story 12 years before the disaster of 1990, where Billy Martin had quit. The Yanks brought in Bob Lemon, Hall of Fame pitcher with the Cleveland Indians. He pitched with Bob Feller, the Rapid Robert, one of the great pitchers who ever lived. A guy who was throwing close to 100 miles an hour, and he wasn't a strikeout pitcher somehow, or at least not like a Nolan Ryan. But Bob Feller, Rapid Robert, he was one of the first pitchers to get close to throwing 100 consistently on the old Jugs gun, or the old radar gun. I don't think it was Jugs yet. Billy Martin had made entreaties prior to Old Timers Day, and the Yankees made an unbelievable announcement. This is something that would never happen now. It happened on Old Timers Day. Bob Lemon was there wearing his Cleveland Indians jersey for Old Timers Day. He was the Yankees manager, and the Yanks actually made an announcement that Billy Martin was going to resume his managerial duties with the Yankees starting in the 1980 season. By that era Steinbrenner standards, it was about as heartwarming a story as you could possibly get. But it didn't work out that way. The Yanks brought Billy back before that. The team kind of collapsed in 79. Goose got hurt. Thurman Munson unfortunately died in a plane crash. And when we think of Old Timers Day, when I think of it, I used to love seeing the guys play. And now they don't even bother to play the game anymore. And Derek Jeter has said stuff like, I'm never putting that uniform on again. And I understand that. I used to think the games were fun because there were certain players that only knew how to play to win. Ron Guidry would go out there and still be throwing 80 miles an hour to a Reggie Jackson or somebody who could still swing. That's where Old Timers Day was fun. When you had guys that were still in shape, whether it's Paul O'Neill a number of years ago, but that kind of thing. That's the best of Old Timers Day. The thing is, though, there is an idea that you're living in the past and you should always look to the future. I understand that. But when you have the kind of history that the Yankee franchise does, even though they have not won a World Series in 15 years, even though there is a version of Aaron Judge's career where he continues to mash, where he wins an MVP award this year, and maybe he wins another. Who knows where his career goes? Maybe he doesn't end up winning a World Series. Maybe he becomes a better Don Mattingly, who to me was the greatest Yankee who never won a World Series. I don't think that there's really much debate on that. But you just don't know. With all the layers of playoffs, it's that much more difficult to win a World Series than it ever was. Those great Yankee teams, if they had even one more layer of playoffs, they wouldn't have won all those World Series because it's baseball, Susan. Shit happens. You could be 80% to win, you could be 90% to win, but that 10% or that 20%, sometimes it's going to come home. It's going to go that way. The last really great Old Timers Day is 2019. I'm not sure if they played the game, but the reason why it was great is they were able to get, unfortunately he was soon to pass, Don Larson, David Wells, and David Cone together. The three Yankees at that point in time who had thrown perfect games at Yankee Stadium. And that was a great photo op. And Wells and Cone still looked terrific. I mean, Larson didn't really have the, Oh, and Larson, of course, was at David Wells' perfect game. Was he? No, he was at Cone's perfect game. Billy Crystal was at David Wells' perfect game. But anyway, I digress. I'm okay with the fact that they don't play the game anymore. And once more, let me point out, enjoy the fact that you have a competitive team. It looks like their Yanks are going to go ahead and win the American League East this year. I mean, the Orioles certainly could turn it around. They really have played even worse than the Yankees since the Yanks were 50-22. Both teams have just been shit by and large. But the Yanks have their guys back. They thought Chisholm might be out for the season. He looks like he's okay. Pitching's coming around. Cole looks terrific. They need to get a little more out of the bullpen, obviously. But you mix and match. You do the best you can. But don't ever take winning for granted. Because there were whole Yankee seasons where the only thing we had to look forward to was maybe the All-Star game and Old Timers Day. At least we have a season here. We have great players in Aaron Judge and Juan Soto. Take a step back. Enjoy it while it's here. Because Aaron Judge's prime is not going to last forever. Realistically, he's got another 1 or 2 years of prime. Hopefully, he keeps doing what he's doing, Fingers crossed, knock on wood. Shit happens. This has been episode 286 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I want to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning here with me in New York. If you catch this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.